I am in a beautiful little town called Saratoga. It's 15 minutes away from Cupertino and like an hour away from San Francisco. And it reminds me a little bit of Europe. Like, you know, these hidden streets right here. Would you even think that Saratoga has this? I've never seen this before. Tipping in California is a very sensitive topic and, in my opinion, is out of control. Before, tipping was a gesture for a great service, like at a restaurant or a nail salon when they served you with a glass of Bellini or a cup of coffee while you're doing your nails. But now it's kind of expected everywhere you go and on any services performed. It is expected that you should be paying a tip. 18% is the new 15%. They turn this gigantic tablet with tipping options with minimum 20%, and you're standing in the line with 20 eyeballs staring at the screen with you to see how much are you going to leave. Is this a familiar situation? I grew up in a different country, and for me it was hard to get used to look at the price of an item and, I don't know, like a dress at H&M or a couch in the IKEA store or a dish in the restaurant, and then see an extra charge on a receipt named taxes. And it was so weird to me. Why would they not add the tax in the price? Why are they adding it separately? Because in Europe or in Central Asia, you see the price and you pay it exactly the number you see, the number you pay. No more, no less. Then I learned about the tips, and I had no idea how much tip was appropriate. In my country, tip means like a compliment for the service, or if you translate it into English, it would be like a cup of tea on me, meaning that thank you for being extra nice to me, and here is the cash for you to buy yourself something to drink on me. When I was in Portugal, we stayed at a little village on the coast of the ocean called Lourinhã, and there was a nice club restaurant closer to the place where we stayed, and I worked in the place almost every day. I usually ordered a cup of latte in the morning, and I would have lunch there too. I was programmed to leave tips, and one of those days I was out of cash, and I promised to the waiter that I will bring tips the next day. So the waiter was so nice. She smiled and she was like, "Don't even worry about it. We don't work here for tips." And I was like, okay, thank you, that's great. And then I immediately remembered the story that my friend told me, that locals don't like Americans because we spoil them. We spoil their services by giving the generous tips. And you know, Portugal is not a rich country, and the average salary there is like $1,000. So when you like tip a lot, you definitely spoil the service, I think. Indeed, I think that in the US, service providers are spoiled because they expect the tips no matter if they provide good service or bad service. And some places don't even make it a choice to thank for good service. They just make the service charge, and this is like an obligation. You have to pay it. Some places that sell products over the counter flip their gigantic tablet that's like asking us how much you'd like to tip. Food delivery apps charge hell of a fees for delivery, for service, for tips for the couriers. People feel pressured to leave tips more than they normally would. Tipping fatigue is becoming a real issue. Isn't it crazy? When you see a price on an item, you need to automatically add around like 40% on top for taxes and tips. Consumers are fed up with being asked to leave a tip every time they buy something, which now includes everything, not just food and drinks, but retail goods, event tickets, for gas, ice cream, coffee, and more. There is a survey service called Capterra's 2023 survey of over 780 US consumers who are familiar with tip screens on the tablet or mobile devices found that half have felt manipulated or tricked into tipping when paying on a checkout tablet recently. When using tip screens, customers often feel that they have to make a quick and polite decision while the worker they're tipping watches their every move. And the social pressure of having witnesses at the checkout counter strongly influences over half of the consumers to tip. Capterra's data shows that while the lack of privacy benefits businesses in a very short term, in a long term, it damages customer experience. Let's talk about the services where it's okay to tip and services where we're not expected to tip. This is awkward, but I would stick to these general rules of thumb. If you enjoy a sit-down meal or drinks at a bar or at a lounge, expect to tip. If you're requesting anything delivered to you from a restaurant, from the room service, from Uber Eats, or from DoorDash, expect to tip. If you take a car service or taxi or rideshare, expect to tip. If you receive an assistance with luggage at the hotel or airport, valet parking services, expect to tip a few dollars. If you use any spa treatments like massage, facials, or other salon services, expect to tip. If you're staying at a hotel, expect to tip housekeeping. And for housekeeping, you have to tip every day you're receiving a cleaning. However, if you are picking up an order at a restaurant or at a fast food restaurant or establishment with a counter services like coffee on the go or bagel or croissant, so do not expect to tip. These businesses typically have a tip jars at the counter, so it's up to you whether you want to tip them or not, because this is entirely optional to contribute. Similarly, don't tip if you're in a place where you serve yourself, such as a buffet or self-serve coffees or shops or like grocery stores. You don't typically tip utility workers who come to your home to fix repairing services or like electrical plumbing issues, because these workers are usually paid by the utility companies. Tipping auto mechanics or repair technicians is not common practice. You generally don't tip doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. Tipping healthcare professionals is not a common practice, and it can even be considered inappropriate in some cases. In what cases can you decline to pay tips or service charges? In the United States, including California, the ability to decline paying tips or service charges depends on several factors. Here are some scenarios in which you may consider declining to pay tips or service charge. For example, poor service. If you receive exceptionally poor service and believe that the quality of the service does not warrant a tip, you can choose to leave a lower tip or no tip at all. That includes ignoring from your server, bad attitude, harassment, discrimination, unsanitary conditions of the tableware, damages, spoiled or rotten food, finding inappropriate items and organisms in your food like hair, insects, pieces of glass, etc. You know what I mean? However, it's a good practice to communicate any concerns with the server or the management first. Another reason could be hidden fees or charges. If you notice hidden fees or charges on your bill that were not disclosed upfront, you have the right to question or dispute them. Be sure to ask for an explanation of any additional charges and review the bill carefully. In California, added tips or service charge are generally considered voluntary unless they are clearly disclosed as mandatory charges. But California law requires restaurants to be transparent about any added tips or service charges. These charges should be clearly disclosed to customers, usually in writing, before they place their order. What is the difference between a service charge and a tip? Service charge, also called operations fees, are mandatory fees automatically added to restaurant bills in California. Customers cannot elect to not pay the service charge because it is part of the bill. And restaurant employers should explicitly communicate to both their employees and customers exactly what happens to the service charge. Under California state law, restaurant service charges are the property of the employer. Employers can keep them for themselves, though they are allowed to pass them on their staff to supplement their wages. However, various California cities have passed ordinances that require restaurant owners to pass on all the service charge payments to their staff. Some of the cities include Berkeley, Oakland, and Santa Monica. What if the restaurant employers violate local ordinances by keeping the service fees? So the restaurant staff who by local ordinances are entitled to service fees are advised to seek for any legal counseling and discuss bringing a wage and hour class action lawsuits against the restaurant. So it is maybe possible to recover all wages plus additional damages such as like late fees and stuff like that. Let's note that tips are not subject to sales tax, whereas service charges are. However, tips are subject to other taxes such as Social Security, and usually no one reports cash. I think that with COVID, tipping behavior has changed to the worse. Tipping fatigue is real. Before it was more straightforward, you go out, you pay, if you receive any services. Now you're forced to pay tips everywhere. Also, research shows that Generation Z, are the least likely to leave a gratuity for service workers, while boomers are the most likely to leave tips, according to the survey by the Bankrate. Just 24% of the group between ages 18 to 26 makes a point of tipping their hairstylist or barbers, compared to 40% of Gen Y and 67% of Gen X and 70% of baby boomers. So baby boomers pay a lot more tips. Gen Z responders said they believe that companies should pay for their employees livable wages rather than rely on tips to support them. Let's discuss, how much should we pay? Should it be a percent of the purchase amount? What if you eat in and part of the order you take out? Is it fair to pay 18 to 20% for takeout? What if you're alone in a restaurant and you just ordered a lot of food? Does it mean that you have to pay more tips just because you ordered a lot more? If you ordered from Uber Eats or DoorDash, does it really matter if your Dasher delivered 1 soup or 2 soups? He gets tipped a percent, more food, same effort, more tips. Is it fair? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about this tipping fatigue? Does it bother you, or you're used to it? Or are you from the service industry and maybe you have a lot more arguments why tipping should be increased? Although I still think that this is employers' responsibility to make sure that people who are employed for the company should get livable wages. But maybe you have other arguments, so let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye bye.